I never thought that trusting my son would leave me without a roof over my head. I stood trembling on the front porch of Adam's $10 million lakeside cottage. The setting sun spread across the water, casting an almost holy glow on the scene, but all I felt was ice under my skin. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst through my ribs. I kept telling myself he was joking, that he would laugh and pull me inside, saying, "Got you, Mom." Instead, Adam stood there, his arms crossed over his pressed linen shirt, looking at me like I was a stray dog he'd grown tired of feeding. Then he smirked, that cruel little twist of his lips I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, rebelling against every curfew, every rule. "Thank you for the cottage, Mom," he said, drawing out each word like he was savoring them. "Now you can finally rest, in a nursing home." For a second, I couldn't even process the words. My mouth fell open, but nothing came out. My knees nearly buckled, and I reached for the porch railing to steady myself. Then I heard it, the dull thud of my suitcases hitting the driveway. I turned to see them tumble down, old zippers bursting open, my clothes spilling onto the gravel like my dignity. It felt like my heart had split open. Each breath burned. I glanced at Adam, searching for even a flicker of regret, but he just watched me with cold amusement, as though he were dismissing an unwanted guest rather than his own mother. I forced myself to stand tall, though my spine felt like it might snap. My hands trembled against my skirt, my fingers curling into the fabric so tight I thought I might tear it. A single tear slipped down my cheek, catching the last orange rays of sun before falling to the ground. How did I not see it? How did I let myself believe his empty promises? I remembered the papers I signed, his hand on mine, whispering, "You'll finally have the life you deserve, Mom." And like a fool, I believed him. I believed that after all those years of sacrifice, all those nights alone, all those birthdays I spent working overtime so he could have everything, he would take care of me. But in that moment, standing on that expensive porch that my life savings built, I realized I had been nothing but a stepping stone to his dreams. Just another rung on the ladder he climbed to show off to his friends. My son. My only son. My vision blurred, but I didn't let myself crumble. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I watched him turn away, laughing into his phone as he sauntered inside. I looked at my suitcases, half open and vulnerable like me, and then I looked out at the lake. The water was so still it felt almost cruel, like it was mocking my chaos. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't done. Not yet. Just a month earlier, I sat across from Adam and the lawyer, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My heart was light that day, fluttering with a mixture of excitement and relief. Adam's eyes sparkled as he painted that perfect picture. A cozy private suite with lake views, morning coffees on the deck, long walks along the shore. "You'll finally have the life you deserve, Mom," he whispered, squeezing my hand. His voice was low, gentle, the same voice he used when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. I clung to that softness, that memory of my little boy, so desperate to believe it was still there inside him. The lawyer droned on about the paperwork, explaining the sale of my apartment, how the money would go directly into finishing the cottage renovations. I hesitated, my pen hovering just above the signature line. A small, trembling voice inside me asked if this was really what I wanted, but Adam's hand tightened on mine again, and he leaned in closer. "Mom, you've done enough struggling. Let me take care of you now, please." Those words washed over me like warm water. I had spent so many years scraping by, counting every coupon, skipping meals so Adam could have new shoes. The thought of finally resting, of being looked after, felt like a reward I had almost forgotten to want, so I signed. I remember the smell of the lawyer's office, stale coffee and dusty old books. I remember Adam's relieved exhale when my pen finally moved across the paper. I remember the faint tremor in my fingers that I forced myself to ignore. When we left, Adam wrapped his arm around my shoulders as we walked to the car. "You won't regret this, Mom," he said, kissing my temple. I felt his lips on my skin, and I closed my eyes, holding that tiny moment close to my chest. I wanted to believe it meant something real. Back at my apartment, I started packing right away. Every dish, every photo frame, each little knick-knack, each piece carried memories of sacrifices and quiet victories. I wrapped them with care, whispering small apologies to the empty rooms, as if they were old friends I was abandoning. I didn't tell my church friends yet. I wanted to surprise them with stories of my new view, my new life. I pictured myself inviting them over for tea, showing them the sun dancing on the lake, finally able to say, "Look at the life Adam gave me." That night, alone in my bed for the last time in that small, cramped apartment, I laid awake for hours. I replayed every word Adam said, every promise. I wanted to believe so badly that this was the beginning of something beautiful. But I didn't know that each stroke of my pen that day had been the first nail in the coffin of my trust. I think back to the years after my husband died. Adam was only 12 then, so small, so lost. His father had been the rock in our lives, the one who fixed leaky faucets and read bedtime stories in that deep, comforting voice. When he was gone, Adam clung to me like a drowning boy to driftwood. I gave up everything without a second thought. Vacations? Never even crossed my mind. New clothes? Only if Adam had outgrown his. I picked up extra shifts, took on cleaning jobs in the evenings, anything to keep the lights on and his lunches packed. I remember sitting in that tiny kitchen, peeling potatoes late at night, listening to his soft snores through the thin walls. Each breath reminded me why I kept going. Those tea-time conversations in that cramped kitchen are burned into me like old scars. Adam would sit across from me, his elbows on the scratched laminate table, eyes bright as he talked about becoming an architect or a pilot or a world traveler. His dreams spilled out so easily, so unafraid. I'd nod, laughing sometimes, other times fighting back tears. I always told him, "Don't let the world shrink you, Adam. Be as big as you want." I used to imagine us together forever. He'd grow up, get married, have children, but we'd always have that kitchen. I saw myself baking cookies with his kids, the smell of cinnamon in the air, Adam popping in to steal one and flash me that mischievous grin. That was my dream, my future. All those sacrifices, all that grinding loneliness. It wasn't for a retirement cruise or a fancy condo. It was for that warm, noisy kitchen, for shared laughter and the comfort of knowing I had built something worth living for. Sometimes, when the loneliness clawed at me too hard, I'd open the box of his old baby clothes I kept hidden in my closet. The little blue onesie with the duck, the tiny socks. I'd hold them against my face and breathe in memories that no longer smelled like him but still somehow felt alive. I didn't see the shift in Adam. Or maybe I chose not to. I didn't notice when he stopped sitting at the table to talk. When he started answering my calls with sighs. When he stopped saying, "I love you," at the end of our rushed phone conversations. I ignored the warning signs, choosing instead to cling to those old echoes in my head. I told myself it was just the stress of adulthood, that he'd come back to me, that his heart was still the same as the boy who used to tuck his face into my neck after a nightmare. That's what hurts most now. Not the money, not the house, but the way I watched my son slip away in slow motion and did nothing to stop it. I loved him so much, I let him become a stranger right in front of me. After Adam slammed that door, I still clung to hope, like a child gripping a broken toy. I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe he was stressed, maybe he'd apologize, maybe he'd come running down the driveway, arms open, calling, "Mom! Wait!" Instead, I stood in that driveway for what felt like hours, the evening air turning sharp against my skin. I stared at my old flip phone, the one I'd kept for its big buttons and simple calls. My fingers shook as I scrolled through my contacts. Church friends, old neighbors, Helen from the prayer group. I called them one by one, voice trembling. "Could you check on Adam? I think there's been a misunderstanding. He asked me to leave, but I'm sure it's just temporary." They all listened kindly, their voices soft and careful, as if I were a fragile animal on the verge of breaking. But none of them had answers. Some offered prayers, others promised to talk to Adam soon. Each polite promise felt like another small stone dropped into my already sinking heart. By the time the sun dipped below the lake and the last golden glimmer vanished, I was sitting on a park bench down the road, my suitcases piled around me like sad sentries. I gripped that flip phone so tight, my knuckles turned white. Every few seconds, I pressed the side button to check for a missed call, as if I didn't already know there would be none. When I finally stood, my legs wobbled like they belonged to someone else. I picked up my suitcases, each one heavier than I remembered. My back ached, my breath came in shallow bursts, but I kept moving, because even if Adam had given up on me, I wasn't ready to give up on myself. Not yet. I told myself, tomorrow he'll call, tomorrow he'll fix this. But deep down, some quiet, honest part of me already knew tomorrow would be just as silent as tonight. It was almost midnight when I decided I couldn't keep waiting on that park bench. My entire body felt brittle, like one wrong step might shatter me. So I walked back to the cottage. When I arrived, the lights inside were bright, the laughter spilling out into the yard. For a second, my heart skipped. Maybe it was a welcome party, maybe this was some elaborate joke, and Adam would open the door and pull me into his arms, laughing. "You really thought I'd throw you out?" I slipped around the side of the house, the gravel crunching under my feet, and stopped just inside the hallway, my back pressed to the cold wall. I could hear Adam in the living room, his voice louder than I had ever heard it, weaving through the boozy laughter of his friends. "She's a walking ATM with wrinkles," he said, cackling so hard he had to stop to catch his breath. I mean, who even lets their mom believe she's moving in? The woman practically begged to sell her apartment. I didn't even have to push. The words hit me like fists. My breath caught in my throat and I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. Each syllable sliced me open, exposing every raw, bleeding hope I had still clung to. Another voice chimed in. I didn't know who it was. Maybe one of his new friends. Maybe one of those women in designer dresses I had seen in his photos. "Damn, you milked her good. You're set for life now, man." Adam's voice again, smug and triumphant. She was always so easy to control. Just dangle the word family, and she'd hand over her soul. I think I stopped breathing for a moment. My head buzzed, my legs buckled, and I slid slowly down the wall until I was crouched on the floor, hugging my knees. My mind replayed the moment he'd squeezed my hand at the lawyer's office, the warmth in his eyes. All of it, just an act. All of it a performance I had paid for, with every ounce of my trust. I stayed there for what felt like forever. Their laughter rose and fell like a cruel symphony, each burst of joy pushing me deeper into my own private darkness. Finally, I stood, numb and shaking, and stumbled out into the night. I don't even remember calling the motel. I don't remember checking in or climbing into the bed. But I remember lying there in that musty room, the smell of cheap detergent clinging to the sheets, my ears echoing with that single word, ATM. I turned to face the wall, curling into myself as if I could disappear into the mattress. My fingers trembled around my old flip phone, but I didn't call anyone. I didn't have anyone to call. I replayed his words over and over until they stitched themselves into the softest parts of me, until I believed them. The next morning, I woke up in that cheap motel room, with my cheeks crusted from tears and my body aching as though I'd been in a fight. In a way, I had. A fight for my heart. A fight I had lost. I stared at the stained ceiling for what felt like hours before I finally sat up, my head pounding. The day felt heavy on my shoulders, but somewhere under that weight was a flicker of something new, a pulse I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. I scrolled through my phone contacts again, my thumb hesitating over each name until I landed on Helen Church. My friend for nearly 2 decades. Helen had always been the one bringing pies to every potluck, the one whispering to me during sermons when my mind wandered. But beyond her warmth, Helen was sharp. She worked in real estate law, a detail I had always tucked away, never imagining I'd need it. I called her. My voice cracked before I even finished saying hello, but Helen didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finally told her everything, Adam's betrayal, the apartment money, the cottage, there was a long silence. Then I heard her sigh. "Margaret, can you meet me today?" she said, softly but firmly. "There's a lot we need to look into." A few hours later, we sat across from each other in a small diner that smelled like burnt coffee and nostalgia. Helen had already ordered me a slice of cherry pie, knowing it was my favorite even when I had no appetite. I picked at the crust, my fingers shaking, my eyes darting to the door every time it opened as if Adam might come barging in to finish what he started. But Helen kept her eyes on me, steady and unwavering. When she reached across the table to squeeze my hand, I felt something in me loosen, just enough to let a sliver of air in. She opened her file folder and began explaining what she'd need to check: the property documents, the transaction records, the legal rights tied to my investment in the cottage. Her words washed over me: lien, equity, ownership share, terms that felt foreign and cold. But her voice gave them shape, turned them into tools instead of weapons. At one point, I looked up and saw my reflection in the diner window, a tired old woman with swollen eyes and slumped shoulders. I barely recognized her. But as Helen spoke, I watched that reflection shift. My spine straightened a little, my chin lifted. I realized I didn't have to keep being that abandoned mother on the park bench. I didn't have to beg for scraps of love from a son who saw me as nothing but a wallet with a heartbeat. When Helen closed her folder and smiled at me, there was no pity in her eyes, only respect. "We'll get to the bottom of this," she said, her voice low and certain. "You trusted him, but trust doesn't erase your rights." I took a deep breath and nodded, a shaky sort of relief curling in my chest. The pie sat mostly untouched in front of me, but for the first time in days, I felt a tiny spark of hunger, not just for food, but for justice, for my life. As we stood to leave, Helen pulled me into a hug. Her warmth seeped into my bones, pushing out the cold Adam had left behind. When she pulled away, she looked me dead in the eye. "You are not alone, Margaret," she said. "Not anymore." A week later, Helen called me back to the same diner. I hadn't touched pie since our last meeting. Somehow, my stomach stayed knotted tighter than any crust. When I stepped in, Helen was already there, her glasses perched low on her nose, papers spread out around her coffee mug like a fortress. She looked up, her expression unreadable. My knees almost gave way. I slid into the booth, my breath shallow. "Tell me," I whispered, afraid of what she might say. She leaned forward, pushing a stack of documents toward me. "Margaret, you didn't just give Adam your apartment money. Legally, when you signed those renovation agreements, you became a partial owner of the cottage." My mouth fell open. My voice caught in my throat before I could shape words. Helen's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Adam not only used all your apartment money, he also took out large renovation loans. Loans he planned to repay by refinancing the cottage, or getting more money from you." I felt the world tilt. It was as though someone had opened a door I didn't even know existed, and behind it was a truth I had been too scared to imagine. "He can't sell or transfer that property without your consent," Helen continued, her finger tapping the document rhythmically. "In fact, because your name is on the title and the renovation contracts, you have legal claim to a significant share of it." The words washed over me in waves, each one pulling away pieces of the confusion that had been choking me. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in the lawyer's office, Adam's hand squeezing mine, his whisper in my ear, "You'll finally have the life you deserve." I remembered the tremble in my fingers, the hesitation in my gut I forced myself to ignore. All this time, I thought I had been cast out with nothing. But I hadn't just given up my home. I had built a claim to his. Helen's voice pulled me back. "If we act fast, we can file a lien and freeze his access to the property. He can't sell it, can't remortgage it. He'll be stuck." I could almost hear Adam's voice in my head, calling me a walking ATM, laughing with his friends. But now, for the first time, I imagined him speechless, cornered. I pressed my palms together on the table, trying to steady the shaking. "Helen, can we really do this?" She nodded without hesitation. "We can. And we will." The diner around us blurred into a dull hum. I felt a rush of heat climb up my neck, into my cheeks, into my fingertips. I didn't recognize it at first. That surge, that roaring under my ribs, it wasn't fear this time. It was something deeper, fiercer, rage. But under that rage, there was something else too. A clear, cutting edge of power I had never let myself hold. I opened my eyes and looked Helen dead in the face. "Let's do it." For the first time in years, my voice didn't waver. I didn't leave the motel the next morning. I sat on the edge of that stiff bed for hours, the sun moving slowly across the faded carpet. Each ray felt like a silent witness, watching me become someone I barely recognized. I thought maybe I'd feel terrified, that without Adam's approval or support, I'd fall apart completely. But something had shifted. Each breath felt a little less jagged than the last. My hands didn't tremble as violently when I reached for my tea. The emptiness that had howled inside me all week started to change shape, less like a void, more like a forge. I knew I couldn't just march up to Adam and demand my rights. That would be exactly what he expected, the meek mother, begging at his doorstep, playing the same old part he'd assigned me. Instead, I called Helen. I asked if she could recommend a short-term place where I could stay, somewhere safe and quiet while we prepared. She suggested a small retirement community on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but warm, with bright windows and friendly staff. I packed my bags slowly, each item feeling like a small goodbye to the woman I had been. The woman who waited for calls, who bent over backward to stay useful, who believed that love meant sacrifice without end. When I arrived at the retirement community, they welcomed me with gentle smiles and soft voices. "Just until you find your footing," the coordinator said, her hand brushing my shoulder in a way that felt almost motherly. My new neighbors were kind. They offered me cookies, invited me to join their knitting circle. On the surface, I seemed like any other quiet, polite old woman, but inside I was building something. Every smile I offered, every polite nod, covered a resolve that was growing sharper by the hour. Each night, I replayed Adam's words, not to torture myself, but to harden my resolve. A walking ATM with wrinkles. Over and over, like hammering a blade on an anvil. I started to sleep through the night again. I started to wake up with my jaw clenched instead of my hand shaking. The women at the community thought I was sweet, a gentle old mother who had been through a hard time. They didn't see the fire, but it was there. I didn't tell anyone my plans. I baked cookies for the staff one afternoon, carefully arranging them on a paper plate, my hands steady. "Thank you for all you do," I said with a small, polite smile. Inside, I was already standing in front of that cottage, papers in hand, watching Adam's face crumble. But not yet. The timing had to be perfect. For now, I let him think I had disappeared, that I had dissolved into the background like an old ghost. Because sometimes, the quietest rooms are where the loudest battles are won. The sun streamed into my little room the next morning, catching the edges of my worn cardigan and turning it gold. I stood at the small kitchenette counter, measuring out flour and sugar with slow, deliberate care. I hadn't baked cookies in years, not like this, not as an offering, but as armor. That afternoon, Helen called. Her voice was firm and quick. "We've found the accounts," she said. "Adam has been trying to access your remaining retirement savings. He probably thought he could siphon off what was left before you realized." A cold wave rushed down my spine. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. "Can we stop him?" I asked, my voice low. "We already did," Helen replied. "We filed to freeze your accounts this morning. He can't touch a cent now." I almost dropped the phone. My knees buckled, and I had to sit on the little armchair by the window. Relief flooded me so sharply, it felt like a second betrayal. a reminder of just how deep Adam's claws had dug into me, even after throwing me away. When I hung up, I pressed my forehead to the cool window pane. Outside, a few residents were tending to the small community garden. They waved when they saw me, their hands dotted with dirt and gentleness. I waved back, my eyes misting, but my chest felt stronger than it had in years. I spent the rest of the day baking cookies for the staff, chocolate chip, lemon shortbread, and almond crescents. I knew they wouldn't understand, not really. To them, it was a sweet gesture from a grateful old woman. But for me, each swirl of the spoon was a vow. Each tray sliding into the oven was a silent promise to myself. Never again would I let anyone hold power over me. When I brought the plates to the front desk, the young woman working there grinned wide. "Margaret, these look incredible. You really didn't have to." I just smiled, folding my hands neatly. "It's my pleasure," I said. My voice sounded so calm it almost startled me. I watched her carry the cookies into the break room, her laughter echoing down the hallway. Inside, though, I was a sea in a storm. The part of me that used to flinch, that waited by the phone, that begged for Adam's affection. She was dissolving, day by day. I went back to my room and sat with my journal. I wrote in big, uneven letters, "You are not his ATM. You are not a burden. You are a woman. You have always been more than what he chose to see." I let the pen rest on the page, my breath coming slow and steady. Then I looked out the window at the sunset, the sky bleeding pink and orange like a wound that was finally beginning to heal. Adam had no idea. No idea that the woman he thought he had broken was still here, planning, breathing, becoming stronger with each hour he underestimated her. I sat there until the stars pricked through the sky, each one a tiny witness to the quiet war. One was waging, and this time, for the first time in my life, it was a war for me. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my small wooden desk, the motel's old pen in my hand, my journal open in front of me. The pages glowed under the yellow lamplight, waiting like an old friend. I started slowly, one sentence at a time. At first, it was shaky. I wrote about the day I signed the apartment papers, how I told myself it was love. About the afternoons when I waited by the window, praying Adam might call just to ask if I'd eaten. How each silence felt like a new crack in my chest. The words poured out, faster and faster, my hand cramping but refusing to stop. I wrote about the birthdays alone, the missed holidays, the way his voice always carried that hidden impatience. I wrote about the day I overheard him calling me an ATM with wrinkles. I wrote until the lines blurred, until my tears dried on my cheeks and my throat felt raw from silent sobs. But instead of making me weaker, each sentence carved away another layer of fear. I began to see it clearly, all of it. The way I taught myself to survive on scraps of affection, the way I convinced myself that sacrifice was love. I saw how I became so small that even my own son couldn't see me anymore. Only what he could take. I paused, staring at the last sentence I had written. "I gave you my life. You gave me your scorn." I set the pen down and pressed my palm to the page. I felt a warmth rise from the paper, a strange sense of freedom swirling under my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing to be heard. I wasn't writing for Adam. I was writing for me. To name the truth I had buried so deep, I almost forgot it was mine to claim. In the days that followed, journaling became my ritual. Each morning, I would brew my weak motel coffee, sit at my desk, and open my journal. Every page became another piece of my soul stitched back together. Neighbors in the community started noticing a change. They'd see me sitting in the common room, notebook in hand, my expression focused and calm. They thought I was simply jotting down recipes or prayers. They didn't know I was rebuilding myself word by word. At night, I read my own entries out loud in a whisper. My own voice surprised me. Low, steady, firm. Each line felt like a stepping stone across a river I had once been too afraid to cross. Through those pages, I met myself again. Not as Adam's mother, not as a walking wallet, not as a background shadow in someone else's story. I saw the girl who dreamed of teaching piano lessons before Adam was born, the woman who sang to herself in the kitchen after her husband passed, the mother who stayed up all night sewing costumes for Adam's school plays. By the end of that week, I closed my journal with a trembling hand and whispered to the dark room, "I see you now, and I won't let you be forgotten ever again." When I turned off the light and crawled into bed, I felt something almost like peace. And under that peace, a quiet steel, a promise to myself that no matter what happened next, I would never again let my story be written by someone else's hand. The papers arrived one afternoon in a thick, heavy envelope, hand-delivered by Helen. She sat across from me in the small, sunlit activity room of the retirement community, her voice low and deliberate as she explained every line. I listened carefully, though my mind thrummed with a dull roar, like a distant storm rolling in. My hands rested on the cool table's surface, but deep inside, they burned with something electric. Helen slid the lean documents toward me. "This is it," she said, her eyes locking on mine. "Once you sign, we'll file it immediately. He won't be able to sell, transfer, or borrow against that property without clearing your share. And with his renovation debts, it means he'll be forced to reckon with you." My eyes drifted down to the blank signature line. My name. Margaret. A name I had almost forgotten could stand alone without Mother or Adams. I picked up the pen. For a moment, my fingers hesitated. Memories flickered like old film reels. Adam as a baby, gripping my pinky fingers so tight. Adam in his graduation gown, eyes bright and hungry for the world. Adam whispering, "I love you, Mom," right before he left for college. But then, sharper images cut through. His smirk on that porch, his laughter echoing through the cottage walls as he called me an ATM. My suitcases crashing onto the gravel, my tears catching the evening sun. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper, and the hesitation melted away. My wrist moved slowly at first, then steadier, my letters flowing strong and clean. It felt like I was signing away decades of grief, like each stroke set down a piece of my voice that had been stolen. When I lifted the pen, I let out a shaky breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Helen reached over and covered my hand with hers, her grip warm and grounding. "You did it," she said softly, pride shimmering beneath her professional calm. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. It wasn't a triumphant grin. It was something deeper. A quiet relief. A whispered promise to the woman I had found again in those journal pages. That night, I sat at my desk and practiced my signature over and over. Page after page filled with my name in looping lines, each one steadier than the last. I felt almost childlike, giddy, in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't about the cottage alone. It was about finally carving my name into my own story. About proving to myself that I could act, not just endure. When I finally set the pen down, I traced the last signature with my fingertip and whispered to the empty room, "You are here. You are real. And you are enough." I crawled into bed, my body exhausted, but my spirit thrumming like a struck bell. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone to rescue me. I was becoming my own rescue. When Helen called 2 days later, I was in the garden at the retirement community, pulling weeds with one of the other residents. The phone buzzed in my apron pocket, and for a moment I almost didn't answer. I was so lost in the smell of damp soil and the gentle warmth of morning sun. But something in me knew this call was different. I wiped my hands on my apron, heart pounding, and answered. "It's done," Helen said without preamble, her voice edged with a sharp, fierce triumph. "The lien has been filed and processed. The property is frozen. Adam can't sell it, can't refinance it, can't touch it. And with the unpaid renovation debts, well, he's going to find himself in a very tight corner." I sank onto the garden bench, the phone pressed tight to my ear. My mind raced, imagining Adam's face as he got the news. His world cracking open, his arrogance sliding right off his smirk. I closed my eyes and felt a shiver run through me. It wasn't fear or sadness. It was power. Real, solid power, humming under my skin like a long-buried current finally breaking through. Helen continued, her voice low and careful now. When the lien is enforced, he'll be forced to sell. Your share is secured first, before any creditors or personal payouts. The rest will go to cover his debts. He'll walk away with nothing. The same nothing he tried to leave you with. A slow, almost disbelieving laugh escaped my lips. I pressed my free hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat hammer against my palm like a victory drum. How do you feel? Helen asked, a hesitant softness creeping into her tone. I looked out at the garden, the neat rows of marigolds and basil, the bees drifting lazily from bloom to bloom. I thought about Adam's words, that smug porch speech, the laughter echoing down the cottage hallway, and I thought about my own hands, how they had once only known sacrifice. Now they knew retribution. I paused, trying to find the right word. Then I realized I didn't need the perfect word. I just needed the truth. I feel alive. Helen laughed too. A light, buoyant sound that made my eyes well up. That's exactly what I hoped to hear, she said. We ended the call, and I sat there for a long while, watching the sky turn from soft blue to the first hints of dusk. A few neighbors passed by, nodding and smiling, oblivious to the quiet revolution unfolding inside me. I thought back to every moment I had given up a piece of myself, every quiet apology I had whispered to keep the peace. And then I thought of my signature on that lien, the final nail in the coffin of Adam's illusions. I rose from the bench slowly, my knees creaking, but my back straight. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I wasn't an ATM, or a servant, or a placeholder in someone else's story. I was a woman reclaiming her space, her voice, and her worth, one signature at a time. He arrived like a thunderstorm on a hot afternoon, sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. I was sitting on the patio of the retirement community, sipping my tea in the shade of a big umbrella, a light breeze teasing the ends of my hair. I almost didn't look up when I heard his heavy footsteps coming down the walkway, but some part of me, that old part that always watched the door for him, turned to look. There he was. Adam. Face red, eyes wild, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it all morning. He didn't look like the polished son I once knew. He looked cornered, like an animal realizing the trap had already sprung. "Mom," he barked before he even reached me. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't flinch. I set my tea down gently, wiped a stray drop from my fingers, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. When I looked at him, I didn't see my son. I saw a man I used to love, and a man I no longer recognized. He stomped closer, towering over me. "You filed a lien? Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined everything." I tilted my head slightly, studying his face the way I might study a strange bird in the yard. My voice came out calm, almost soft. "I don't recognize you anymore. You are no son of mine." His mouth fell open, his eyes searching my face for the old woman he expected, the one who would stammer, apologize, maybe even offer to fix everything with another sacrifice. But she was gone. "You're crazy," he spat. "You think this makes you strong? You think you've won? You don't know how the world works, Mom. You're nothing without me." I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't joy. It was release. The final cut of a rope that had bound me for too long. "I was always something without you," I said, my voice steady as stone. "You just never wanted to see it." He shook his head violently, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You're making a huge mistake. You're going to regret this. When that cottage sells, I'll make sure you get nothing." I raised a hand, silencing him. "That's enough, Adam." My hand felt light in the air, but the words hit him like a brick wall. His face crumpled, his mouth opening and closing around curses that never fully formed. Around us, a few of the other residents had stopped to watch. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't embarrassed to be seen standing up for myself. Adam stood there a moment longer, his rage sputtering into pathetic gasps. Then he turned, storming back down the walkway, his curses fading into the garden beyond. I picked up my tea again, my fingers steady, my heart slow and calm. I looked down at the reflection in the cup. My own face, lined and tired, but unmistakably mine. I took a long sip and set it back down, the taste sweeter than anything I'd ever baked. At last, I felt the full weight of the words I had spoken. "You are no son of mine." And I realized they didn't just free me from him, they returned me to myself. He didn't even make it out of the community gates before his phone rang. I watched from the patio, my tea warming my palms, as he answered, shoulders tense, pacing like a caged dog. At first, his voice was loud, that same barking tone he used on me, but then it dropped, turned sharp and frantic. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. I already knew what they were telling him. The cottage was being seized and prepared for sale. My share was protected by law, carved out first like a prize piece of cake. The rest? All of it swallowed by his renovation loans and his reckless debts. He spun around, mouth twisted, eyes darting, as if trying to find someone to blame. But no one came to help him. Not his smirking friends. Not his so-called business partners. Not even the mother he used to see as a bottomless wallet. Adam crumpled into a bench across the garden, phone dangling in his hand. His head dropped into his palms, his shoulders shaking. Maybe with anger, maybe with the shock of losing everything he thought he owned. I didn't move to comfort him. I didn't even feel the urge to stand up. I thought about all the years I spent hoping for his approval, offering my love like an open wound, praying he might someday see me as more than a tool. But in that moment, as I watched him fold into himself, I felt nothing. No relief, no triumph, just an empty, cool stillness. A staff member walked past and glanced at me, her eyes wide with curiosity. I gave her a small nod, a gentle smile, as if to say, "It's all right, let him break." My phone buzzed then. A text from Helen, "Sale proceedings confirmed. Your share will cover your new home and more. Rest will repay debts. Adam will receive no surplus." I set the phone down on the table, exhaling a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for decades. I watched Adam stand again, stumbling away with no clear direction, his steps unsteady, his face pale and hollow. It struck me then. He looked exactly how I used to feel. Lost, desperate, powerless. Only now, I wasn't the one adrift. I wasn't the one begging to be seen or loved. I picked up my tea, the steam curling gently against my cheek, and savored the warmth. The cottage was gone. The dream he sold me was gone. The illusion of family, gone. And yet here I was, more solid, more alive than I had ever been. As Adam disappeared down the garden path, shrinking smaller and smaller until he was just another lost man in the distance, I whispered to the breeze, "Goodbye, Adam." For the first time, it felt final. And it felt right. That night, I returned to my room at the retirement community and sat quietly at my small desk. The moonlight spilled across the floor like a pale path, soft and cold. I almost didn't check my phone, but something pulled me to it. Some final thread that needed cutting. There it was. A message from Adam. "Mom, please. I have nowhere to go. They're throwing me out tomorrow. I need help. Just let me stay with you for a bit, please." I stared at the screen, my heart utterly still. I pictured him in a cheap motel room, the kind I had once wept in. The carpet sticky, the air stale and heavy. I imagined his trembling hands, his mind spiraling, as he realized there were no more credit cards to swipe, no more phone calls to charm his way out. Once, I would have rushed to pack a care package, rushed to his side with hot soup and open arms. Once, I would have believed this message meant he saw me again, that he needed me, that love could be mended with one desperate please. But I knew better now. I set the phone on the desk and watched the notification glow, as if waiting for me to give it life. Instead, I picked up my old flip phone, The same one I'd clutched on that park bench, waiting for his call that never came. The same one that rang hollow so many nights when I prayed for a different ending. I opened Adam's message again and read it one more time. Slowly, deliberately. Then I pressed the options button and selected block number. A small window popped up. Are you sure? I didn't hesitate. My thumb hovered for only a breath before I pressed yes. A strange warmth spread through me, from my chest down into my fingertips, like stepping into a sunbeam after years in a cold room. My breath came easy, my shoulders fell back, and I felt an unfamiliar lightness. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from release. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the quiet seep into every corner of me. In that moment, I knew. Adam's chapter in my life was truly finished. The begging, the betrayals, the endless cycle of hope and humiliation, all of it ended with a single press of my thumb. When I finally stood and slipped into bed, I felt no ghosts clinging to my thoughts, no regrets clawing at my heart, just a soft, deep peace. For the first time in decades, I slept through the night without dreaming of a door opening that never did. When the final transfer from the cottage sale cleared, Helen called me personally. Her voice was bright and warm, almost giddy. "It's done," she said. "Your share is safe. You're free to do whatever you want, Margaret." I thanked her quietly, my words simple but heavy with all the meanings they carried. Gratitude, relief, an ending, and a beginning. A week later, I signed the papers for a small but sunny apartment near my old church. The day I turned the key in the door, I stood there for a long time, breathing in the faint smell of new paint and possibility. The place wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, just enough space for a sewing nook and a cozy kitchen. The windows overlooked a little park, where children chased each other between swings and slides. I set my bags down, walked to the window, and let the laughter from below rise up to meet me. Instead of aching, it felt like music,